When Millennium Falcon Smugglers Run opened at Disneyland in May of 2019, it immediately drew comparisons to Disney's original Star Wars ride, Star Tours. On paper, the two rides share a lot of similarities. Both are motion simulator attractions that bring guests flying through the Star Wars universe. This led many to wonder why Disney would keep the 30-plus-year-old Star Tours while they were building essentially its replacement in a dedicated Star Wars land on both coasts. But the two rides have one major difference: interactivity. Smugglers Run came at the tail end of a major push by Disney to create interactive experiences in their parks to compete with the rise of interactive home media. The ride was marketed as the ultimate dream for Star Wars fans, allowing them to take control of the Millennium Falcon. However, after opening, a sentiment emerged from both Disney Parks fans and Star Wars fans that the ride fell short of expectations. And it didn't just fall short of the astronomical expectations for Galaxy's Edge. It fell short when compared to the similar ride only a few hundred feet away. The mid-2000s and early 2010s in the development of the Disney parks could be defined by one word: interactive. This reflected a cultural shift at the time where personalized experiences were becoming more and more common around the world as technology and the internet infiltrated every aspect of our daily lives. Disney's goal was to make their parks feel as personalized and interactive as the experiences found on the internet. This manifested in increasing magic moments across the resorts, interactive queues, and finding ways to make even the rides feel like an individualized experience. At the same time, Disney was given the opportunity of a lifetime to acquire Lucasfilm from George Lucas and take full control of the monolithic Star Wars franchise. The Disney machine was about to take the Star Wars brand to a different level of corporate synergy.
And Disney now owns The Force and says it has plans for more Star Wars movies. Walt Disney agreed to pay $4 billion for Lucasfilm, giving it control of the Star Wars and Indiana Jones franchises. Disney expects to release Star Wars Episode 7 in 2015, followed by Episodes 8 and 9. Disney says it also has plans for Star Wars theme parks and TV shows.
Right alongside the acquisition, Disney had plans to create a new trilogy of mainline Star Wars movies, and plans to bring the franchise to the parks in a major way began immediately. This was a huge opportunity for the parks, which had just been caught flat-footed for the first time in basically ever. After Disney failed to impress with their plans for Harry Potter in the Disney parks, Universal took on the challenge and created a new breed of theme park experiences. The Wizarding World was not just a smash hit for Universal, it was a complete change for the entire industry. Disney was chasing an answer in the wake of the Wizarding World and made attempts to recreate its success with the reworking of California Adventure's Cars Land, New Fantasyland, and the then upcoming Avatar Land. But only Cars Land seemed to move the needle how Disney wanted, and even then it fell short of Universal's impact. What Harry Potter had going into the Wizarding World was a rabid fan base eager to live in the worlds of their favorite story. The same couldn't be said for Disney's responses, so the opportunity that Star Wars provided was huge, and people both inside Disney and in the general public knew. When Bob Iger announced Star Wars Galaxy's Edge for both Disneyland and Disney's Hollywood Studios, the hype behind the project was unheard of after Disney had spent the 2000s really cultivating and growing a parks fan base that didn't just visit the parks, but wore the fandom on their sleeves. Combining that with the Star Wars fan base was the perfect recipe for not just hype, but also astronomical expectations.
You know that the lands themselves are going to be very spectacular. In fact, I would say they're going to be epic. As you know, these lands will have two attractions. One that puts you right in the middle of a battle between the First Order and the Resistance, including a feeling that you're actually inside a Star Destroyer. And as you can imagine from this image, the scale of this attraction is unlike anything we've ever done before. As you all know, you'll also have a chance to fly, yes, the Millennium Falcon.
While Galaxy's Edge was under development, video games were riding a massive pop culture resurgence fueled by YouTube, the onset of virtual reality, and a shift from single-player experiences to online multiplayer. While prior to this, Disney had dipped their toes into the gaming industry, the game had changed, and they never seemed fully committed to the shifting industry. At the top, there was some concern as to how consumers having far more access to entertainment experiences at home could impact their bottom line. While Disney profited from at-home entertainment, the entire company was built on out-of-home entertainment, whether that be in theaters or in theme parks. By the time of Galaxy's Edge, Disney knew they couldn't just ignore the shift in the industry, and that led them to trying to elevate the gaming experience to a new level in their upcoming lands. The thought was, what is something that only a theme park could do for a video game experience, and that is combining a video game with a ride system already utilized to simulate the Star Wars universe.
August 29th at Walt Disney World Resort.
When guests walked into Galaxy's Edge for the first time in 2019, they knew that the e-ticket of the land was not yet ready for the grand opening. However, at the center of the land, Millennium Falcon Smugglers Run was ready for its debut. When guests approached the one-to-one replica of the Millennium Falcon on both coasts, they would enter the queue to begin their boarding process. The queue brings guests through the maintenance base of Onaka Transport Solutions, run by Hondo Onaka, who's a smuggler who made just some minor appearances in Star Wars media prior to the ride. Hondo greets guests in the pre-show of the ride, depicted by an incredibly fluid animatronic.
I need flight crews to transport this valuable merchandise across the galaxy.
In the pre-show, Hondo establishes that he worked out a deal with Chewbacca to borrow the Millennium Falcon for a transport of coaxium. Guests will form the flight crew for Hondo on this dangerous mission, separated into 3 distinct roles: pilots, gunners, and engineers. Following the pre-show, guests are split into 2 different lines down the jet bridge to the Millennium Falcon. This allows the ride to operate at a much higher capacity with essentially 4 ride systems running, 2 turntables on each side and 1 ADA cabin each. At the end of the jet bridge, groups of 6 are formed with the roles assigned to everyone, and guests are then brought into the chest room to wait their turn. Once their group color is called, guests are then loaded onto the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon for their ride. Once in the cockpit, guests are essentially in their own flight simulation pod with their cabin on a motion base and the projected dome around them fully rendered in real time. As guests are guided through the controls unique to their positions, guests make the jump to light speed out of Batuu. Guests have to work together to free a shipment of coaxium from a train, and after crashing into it, guests successfully retrieve 1 container.
You see, just as I promised, my friend. Come on, let's get another container of coaxium.
Next, you try to free a 2nd container of coaxium to bring Hondo some additional profit. As the Star Destroyer collapses around them, guests escape and make their way back to Batuu and are scored based off their performance in the mission and are ushered off the Falcon.
Yes, Chewie will pilot us in remote. You retrieve 2 containers of coaxium. This will greatly help the resistance. You have heard the First Order and made Chewie proud.
Unlike most rides, Smugglers Run doesn't follow a strict narrative. The ride, for all intents and purposes, is just a gigantic video game. While there are guardrails, for the most part, guests' actions in the cabin directly control the projected media in the motion base, leading to a truly interactive experience. But is it fun? While fans would have been excited for just about anything in Galaxy's Edge when it finally opened, Smugglers Run had some flaws that began to show early. For starters, the ride story is at best forgettable. Disney pioneered putting story at the forefront of every ride, and Smugglers Run just doesn't have a strong one. But this is intentional. You can't have a rigid story if you want the level of interactivity the ride set out to include. The story needs to be malleable to guest input in every possible scenario that guests can put them in. This results in the frame of a good story, but not the whole picture. The problem with designing a ride that is a video game is that you need to design a ride for the lowest common denominator of guest skill level. You can't assume that most guests are coming into this ride with prior gaming experience, and because of that, gameplay has to be for all ages. I think there was an idea that having multiple roles could help create tiers of experience levels, but at some point in development, the realization that families will want to see their young kids in the pilot chairs set in, and so the entire experience has minimal difficulty or challenge built in. What makes this worse is that tying this ride into the Millennium Falcon specifically carries massive expectations. This isn't some nondescript starship that is maybe in the Star Wars universe or something. This is one of the most iconic vehicles in the history of film.
I've been waiting my whole life for this.
You ready?
Are you?
Regardless of the promotion, anything related to the Millennium Falcon carries a weight that goes beyond a mid-tier ride with a minimal difficulty video game built in. Now, don't get me wrong, the actual technology to pull this off is really impressive when it works. Rendering a scene like this and projecting onto a dome in sync with ride motion that's also determined from the inputs is a feat of Imagineering, and it does deserve praise. However, impressive tech alone doesn't necessarily make a good ride experience, and to me, Smugglers Run's ride experience isn't fun, especially when you look at its sister ride at both of its parks.
If you've ever dreamed of taking off into space, traveling at light speed, and chasing intergalactic bad guys, then Star Tours, the newest Tomorrowland attraction at Disneyland in California, is for you. Some say it's the ultimate thrill experience, and others well, they're a bit more descriptive.
I loved it.
Star Tours is a joint venture between the Walt Disney Company and George Lucas.
So they've given me the opportunity to include my characters into that part of the park and try to come up with some new ideas.
I must admit we make a splendid team.
In the early 80s, Star Tours reportedly started development as a ride bringing guests through the 1979 Disney film The Black Hole. This movie, though, did not meet expectations at the box office and really didn't achieve the cultural significance that Disney had hoped it would. This meant that the ride was put back on the shelf. That is until a few years later when the new Disney management team had first forged a partnership with Star Wars visionary George Lucas. This partnership in the parks started with Captain EO, which opened in 1986, but just a year later, the space motion simulator concept came back to life. Star Tours utilizes early military flight simulator technology to synchronize motion with a ride film created by the visual effects team. The combination of these two work in tandem to trick guest senses into thinking they are flying through the Star Wars universe, and this would pioneer the motion simulator ride type that we know today. The story also worked to sell the ride system. The queue was designed to feel like a Star Wars airport terminal. In its original iteration, guests are boarding a sightseeing flight to Endor, where the final battle of the original trilogy took place.
R2, light speed to Endor! R2, we passed the Endor moon! Now what's the matter? Oh no! Comets!
Chaos would then ensue, leading passengers to be caught in the middle of a battle between the Republic and the Empire. Ultimately, guests would return safely to the Star Tours terminal and exit through a gift shop. After opening, Star Tours was a massive success. Because of the ride system, the narrative of the attraction needed to be more direct and cinematic in nature, since guests were only able to focus on the media in front of them, unlike the classic cocktail party rides that made up the Disney parks at the time. This change in direction resonated with guests and would lead to more experimenting in ride storytelling in the years to come. The ride proved popular, and because of its high capacity and easy scalability, the ride would open at 3 additional Disney parks in the years following, as well as reusing the ride system for Body Wars at Epcot. As the cost of the ride system got cheaper and more companies began to make their own takes on the concept, motion simulators began popping up across the country at parks of all sizes. Star Tours was not just a success for Disney, but it kickstarted the genre of rides that would ultimately lead to Smugglers Run.
In all my life, I have never seen so much hype over a movie.
If you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you could ever imagine.
It seems Star Wars once again has a hold of this country's imagination. But this Star Wars movie takes us back 30 years. It is actually episode 1. We'll find out where Darth Vader came from.
It's going to set a lot of groundwork. It's really going to kind of complete the story for a lot of us.
Then, in the late 90s, George Lucas was gearing up to release another trilogy of Star Wars movies, and with the excitement that brought, also came discussions of updating Star Tours. While the ride was popular, its strict narrative meant that it wasn't as re-rideable as many of Disney's classics. In addition, the rampant proliferation of simulator rides in the wake of Star Tours' opening meant that Disney wanted to push it further to maintain their competitive edge. When they began to work on a new story for the ride, a problem came up. If they were to update it for the upcoming prequels, it would be outdated in a few years when the next movie came out. The timeline of the story would quickly become a mess, and this became a major obstacle for Imagineers and Lucas to solve for Star Tours 2. After a surprisingly complicated development process, Star Tours The Adventures Continue was announced at D23 in 2009. This update would take place in the coming year at all installations of Star Tours. This version would solve many of the issues that started to arise with the original. It would piece together multiple randomized story segments to create a unique narrative for each ride. This solved the issue of the singular story getting stale, while keeping an overarching narrative that weaves the scenes together. It allowed for them to highlight more iconic locations from the ever-expanding Star Wars universe. And it also differentiated them from nearly every other simulator ride that had popped up since. Other small ride changes were the replacement of Rex with
CP3. Oh, yes, Master Michael.
the addition of 3D, and the addition of the selection of a rebel spy on each flight. The latter followed the early days of that company-wide directive to increase the amount of individualized magic moments across the resorts. Between selecting the one rebel spy and the randomized storyline, it made guests feel like the ride was a unique experience for just their specific ride vehicle of guests. But at its core, Star Tours The Adventures Continue retained that comedy and not overly serious tone that originally endeared a lot of people to the Star Wars franchise. This update breathed new life into the attraction, and it solidified its position as a reliable second-tier attraction at every park it called home. On paper, Smugglers Run was the next logical step to quote-unquote plussing the Star Tours experience. Now, not only are guests in the story, they're controlling it. Not only did it fulfill the interactive experience initiatives that Disney had spent over a decade pushing by this point, it also served as a complement to the immersion that parks were now expected to deliver in the wake of the Wizarding World. But in reality, Smugglers Run became a clear example of the flaws in fully interactive theme park experiences, and I think so much that is clear because of its similarities to Star Tours. Smugglers Run and Star Tours are incredibly comparable experiences, but born out of different Imagineering mindsets. By the time of Smugglers Run, Disney was in too deep with interaction, and I think they overlooked what made previous interactive rides successful. Disney themselves had achieved success with Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin, Toy Story Mania, Test Track, and even a lot of what Disney Quest had to offer. Then over at Universal, they had hit a home run with Men in Black Alien Attack in the early 2000s, and Sally Dark Rides had really popularized the concept at regional parks across the country. These rides thrive off the competition they create, and people are competitive by nature, and especially against their families. Add in that guests are on vacation with their family and at a theme park, which can sometimes result in tension that a meaningless competition can really help ease. This competition-forward approach is enhanced with the easy-to-understand scoring and tactile interaction which fuels the competition as the ride unfolds, instead of just at the end of the experience. There isn't a learning curve to pointing at targets and pressing a button and earning points from that. This super approachable and basic gameplay makes these rides so popular with every age and skill level. But Smugglers Run had complicated gameplay. While the individual role controls aren't actually that complex, the combination of all 6 makes it difficult to pinpoint your instructions and your impact on the ride. This gets at the core problem for the ride. Guests aren't all the same. Beyond different ages and skill levels, there's also a massive range of how willing people are to suspend their disbelief and live in the world of the ride, which leads to different expectations for what they're going to get out of the ride. There's also this unique wrinkle for Smugglers Run specifically, in that the roles aren't the same. In an ideal world, each role would be the favorite for about a third of guests, but when one of those roles gets to fly the ship and the others get to press buttons kind of randomly, you have an inconsistent experience even within the same cabin. This also leads to operational challenges, making wait times longer. Recently, I used the single rider line, and I was added to a group of 2 pilots, leaving 3 empty seats while the ride was posting over an hour wait and standby. So, if guests aren't all the same and your video game experience expects them to be, that requires your ride itself to be good enough even without interacting. This isn't a problem for shooting dark rides where a majority of guests want to interact, and anyone who doesn't likely isn't getting in line. But being a part of Galaxy's Edge draws in guests who may not even be a fan of interactive rides, solely because it's themed to Star Wars. The story of Smugglers Run doesn't hold up on its own without guests interacting, but the story needed to be minimal because the ride is happening in real time, so what you get is a few simple story beats in a whole bunch of directions. And as much as I love Hondo as a character, he isn't this iconic part of the Star Wars universe that I want to listen to. The few responses from Chewbacca don't satiate the desire for characters in the ride. The ride ultimately isn't a story, it's a frame for the game. But even if guests are interacting how the ride wants them to, it still doesn't have that same competition and scoring that made previous rides work. The ride is almost too interactive that it makes it too difficult to assign point values and feel like each guest's actions actually matter. I've actually gotten survey pop-ups in the Disney World app asking if I felt my job as an engineer mattered, which tells me I'm not alone in this thought. On a ride like Buzz Lightyear, when I hit a target, I see my score go up. But then on the Millennium Falcon, when I turn it, do I get points? I do, but how are those points calculated? Was that the ideal maneuver? I don't know. This ambiguity is a huge flaw in the ride, and it shows where Disney jumped the shark when it came to interactivity. Since Galaxy's Edge opened, Disney has not so quietly shifted the conversation around Imagineering away from interaction. While it's still a part of the process, it doesn't feel as if it's at the core of what they do. Smugglers Run and the Galactic Star Cruiser both tried to bring interactivity to the next level, and both missed their respective marks and soured executives on this path. New additions to the Disney parks have excluded these video game-esque components that dominated the park's marketing in the late 2000s and early 2010s. And in some cases, like Test Track 3.0, the interactive components were removed in favor of a more straightforward ride experience. which makes it even weirder that Universal would open their most interactive ride in 2021 with the first iteration of Mario Kart Bowser's Challenge, which has since gone on to be cloned at Universal Hollywood as well as Epic Universe. It's reported that with the shared creative control that came along with the Nintendo license, there was a strong push from them to ensure that the ride was something that was interactive and accessible to the whole family. This presented the challenge of recreating a racing game on a slow-moving fixed track. Universal tried to combine AR technology with a traditional tracked ride instead of this full simulator to try and create this direct interaction for each guest while still bringing a group of them together through practical sets. While the concept is interesting, I think it ended up missing the mark for the average guest still. And I think that's because it shares a lot of similarities with Smugglers Run's ride experience. It's hard to tell if actions directly translate one-to-one with coins in Mario Kart, and they don't impact the ride itself either. The ride doesn't elevate the home gaming experience in a way that feels unique to me. The ride just makes me wish I was just playing a normal game of Mario Kart and not this watered-down, awkward version of it. Now, side note, the practical sets of Mario Kart are actually gorgeous, but I think the AR goggles really distract from them. So if you have the opportunity, I actually think it's worthwhile to just ride it once without the goggles on. But anyways, ironically, I almost wish that Universal went the direction that Disney did for Test Track 2.0 and then subsequently removed in the 3.0 update. While operationally it was not perfect and the show scenes around it were not amazing, the actual concept of designing the car mid-queue and then carrying those scores into the ride themselves felt like a great balance of just enough interactivity, but not so much that it takes away from the experience. Imagine if during the queue for Mario Kart, you and your family got to select racers with different strengths and weaknesses, as well as what power-ups you'd have in play. Then those decisions change digital elements in the practical sets in a race against the other ride track, bringing back that competition element.
Greetings and welcome, esteemed space travelers. I'm Bree Starlighter, Chief Holo Communications Officer for Star Tours. We are thrilled to offer several new deluxe excursion packages blasting off daily from our exclusive spaceports at Disney's Hollywood Studios in Florida and Disneyland Resort in California. Our brand new Star Speeder 1000 fleet is ready for liftoff. In fact, with so many new Star Tours experiences and destinations spanning the known universe, it's practically impossible to have the same adventure twice. A galaxy of thrills and excitement awaits you, so prepare for liftoff. Star Tours. The adventures continue.
When Star Tours had a full-scale reimagining 2 decades after its opening, it not only brought new life to the attraction, it also raised expectations for simulator rides as a whole. Cleverly reusing existing 3D assets made for Star Wars media created this ability to constantly bring new experiences to the ride for cheap and bring the all-important brand synergy to the ride as Star Wars came under the Disney umbrella. The core of the ride stayed intact, but the experience was now fresh every time and spanned the entirety of the now massive Star Wars canon. Disney didn't shy away from copying this idea in the early stages of Smugglers Run's development. It was designed to have the ability for a variety of missions and stories. In fact, in the writing process for this video, a Wall Street Journal article revealed that the original intention was for the ride to have 5 different missions at opening. But this was cut down to just the one as the entire Galaxy's Edge project went substantially over budget and the deadlines were coming fast. But the vehicle itself is still built for this. Every button, switch, or lever that you can interact with on the ride is wired and ready to be used even if the current mission doesn't use it.
Why don't we tell everybody about that other thing that we've been working on? Yeah, this I'm really excited about. If you're ever in the park, sometimes you might see me and a friend of mine named John Favreau. We love the parks. Yeah, John, he's the best. And being huge fans, we were really thrilled when Josh, you guys asked us to take a look at one of the rides, and we're going to share something really cool. We are working with the Disney Imagineers to do a new Mandalorian and Grogu story for the Millennium Falcon ride.
Hopefully this is something that we see come into play with the new mission in May of 2026, nearly 7 years after the ride first opened. From what we know right now, the mission is based off the Mandalorian Grogu movie that's also set to release the same day as the new mission. Disney has put a lot of emphasis on the idea that all roles will have unique gameplay in this mission, and especially that the engineers will essentially have a different storyline than the pilots. The engineers will also be the ones that are determining which mission the crew takes on. Whether or not this mission is a step forward and a positive sign of things to come for the ride will have to be seen, but it is hard for me to think that this will be a negative for the ride, as its shine has almost entirely worn off since opening. While new missions likely won't solve all of the issues at the core of the Smugglers Run experience, and it certainly won't help differentiate itself against Star Tours, it at least helps bring the ride to a similar level as the 30-year-old classic that it's always compared to. Disney inadvertently gave us a way to compare the design philosophy of interactive and non-interactive rides with Smugglers Run and Star Tours. Through these two, you can see both the benefits and, more importantly, the drawbacks that came with chasing a fully interactive experience in the decades following Star Tours' development. While some people, if not a majority, do prefer Smugglers Run, the fact that it's not a clear answer is reason enough to know that this wasn't a worthwhile long-term goal for the parks. The competition that Disney had feared was coming with home media never ended up being a threat to their parks. People seek out these parks for the same reason they always have, which is to escape reality in a way that only a theme park can accomplish. It is super cool to be able to interact with the environments in a park, but that comes secondary to immersion, escapism, and most importantly, storytelling. Smugglers Run taught Disney to find the balance in interactivity and not make it the entire experience itself. Or in a case like Web Slingers, whose development started before the opening of Smugglers Run, bringing interactive experiences back to basics. Just maybe not as the major new ride in your highly anticipated brand new land again. But regardless, both Disney and Universal have shifted to making guests feel a part of the rides narratively, even without direct physical interaction. While the save the world trope can be tiring, giving guests stakes in the story narratively has proven to be successful and specifically appeals to the generation that's been a part of stories their entire lives. If people wanted to play a video game, they would do it at home where it's more comfortable, cheaper, and there's no queue. Dressing a video game as a ride can only do so much to counter that convenience. While Smugglers Run will no doubt evolve in the coming years, I think its legacy won't be one of innovation, but one of lessons learned. Thank you so much for watching. Sorry this video took a little bit longer than I expected, but I really wanted to make sure that I got my thoughts in order, especially after I rode Web Slingers for the first time, and I didn't entirely hate it. I kind of had fun. So I had to process that first before I went back to writing this one. But yeah, let me know if you agree with me or if you think Smugglers Run is the best ride in the world. But otherwise, I will see you next time.